This ghetto trash doesn't belong in first class. Those words, spoken by a gate agent at Metropolitan International Airport, would change everything. Not just for 11-year-old Zoe Jackson, but for the entire airline industry. Imagine being 11 years old, standing alone at an airport gate holding your passport with trembling hands, only to watch in horror as a gate agent tears it apart right in front of you. Now imagine that same gate agent's face when she discovers your father is the chief inspector of the Federal Aviation Administration. What happened next at that airport terminal didn't just change one little girl's day. It exposed a system that desperately needed fixing. This is the story of Zoe Jackson, whose worst travel nightmare became a turning point for justice in America's airports. By the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the smallest voices create the biggest echoes. You'll see how one moment of cruelty led to a nationwide transformation in how passengers are treated. You'll witness accountability in action. Stay with me, because what unfolds over the next hour will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about power, accountability, and standing up for what's right. This isn't just about a torn passport. It's about dignity, respect, and the courage to speak up when faced with injustice. Welcome to Black Triumphant. Every story we share is more than just drama. It's a reminder of strength, resilience, and justice. If you believe in celebrating Black excellence and standing against injustice and prejudice, hit that like and subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications so you never miss our powerful stories of triumph against the odds. We'd love to know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Drop your location in the comments below. Let's see how far this story reaches around the world. Now, let's dive into the story of Zoe Jackson, the girl whose torn passport tore down barriers and built new standards for justice. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of the Jackson family home in Silver Springs, casting golden stripes across Zoe's bedroom floor. Her alarm went off at 5:30 a.m., but she'd been awake since 5 o'clock, excitement coursing through her veins. This wasn't just any Wednesday in October. This was the day she'd been counting down for weeks, the start of their family trip to New Orleans to visit her grandmother. Zoe sat up in bed, her natural hair still wrapped in its satin bonnet, and reached for her backpack. Unzipping the front pocket, she carefully removed the small navy blue booklet that represented adventure and possibility her passport. Though they were only flying domestically, their specific flight path required international documentation. She ran her fingers over the embossed golden eagle on the cover, feeling the slight texture beneath her fingertips. Inside was her official photo, the one where she'd tried so hard not to smile but ended up with a half smirk anyway, and pages waiting to be filled with stamps from future adventures. Zoe had received this passport only 6 months ago. Her father, Dr. Marcus Jackson, had sat with her at the kitchen table, surrounded by application forms. "Zoe," he'd said in that serious but warm voice he used when he wanted her to really listen. "This little book is more than just a document. It's proof of your citizenship, your identity as an American. It represents freedom to travel, to explore, to learn about the world beyond our neighborhood. You need to treat it with respect and care." At 43, Dr. Jackson wasn't just any father giving advice. As the Chief Federal Aviation Administration Inspector, he oversaw safety regulations at 47 major airports across the eastern seaboard, supervising 1,238 safety inspectors who ensured airline compliance with federal regulations. His word carried weight in the aviation world when he spoke about safety protocols or passenger rights. People listened. Zoe carefully returned the passport to her backpack's front pocket, zipping it securely. She'd practiced this routine multiple times, knowing exactly where her important documents were, keeping them accessible but protected. Her father had taught her well. Downstairs, the smell of her mother's famous blueberry pancakes wafted through the house. Vanessa Jackson, a corporate attorney specializing in civil rights law, was humming softly as she flipped another perfect pancake onto the growing stack. At 41, she balanced her demanding career with family life, showing Zoe daily what it meant to be both successful and present. "Morning, Mom," Zoe said, entering the kitchen with her backpack already secured over her shoulder. "Good morning, sweetheart," Vanessa replied, turning to plant a kiss on her daughter's forehead. "All packed and ready. Double-checked everything last night," Zoe confirmed proudly. 7-year-old Eli Jackson bounded into the kitchen, energy radiating from every inch of his small frame. Are we leaving yet? Are we on the airplane yet? Can I sit by the window? Dr. Jackson followed his son into the kitchen, adjusting his tie. Even on vacation days, he dressed with precision, habits formed through years of representing federal authority. Slow down, buddy, he laughed. Breakfast first, then security lines, then boarding, then takeoff, everything in its proper order. Over breakfast, Dr. Jackson reviewed the travel plan with military precision. Our flight is at 9:45 a.m. from Metropolitan International. We'll arrive at the airport by 7:30, which gives us 2 hours for check-in and security. Zoe, you know where your passport and boarding pass are kept. Front pocket of my backpack. Dad, she replied confidently. Good. And if anyone asks you questions, answer clearly and politely. Make eye contact. Don't fidget. He nodded approvingly. Exactly. Remember, how you present yourself matters. People make judgments in seconds. What went unsaid, but what both Zoe and her parents understood, was that as a Black family, they were often judged more harshly, held to higher standards, expected to prove themselves worthy of respect that others received automatically. These weren't paranoid concerns. They were practical preparations for navigating a world that wasn't always fair. By 7:15 a.m., the Jackson family was loaded into their SUV, heading toward Metropolitan International Airport. Zoe sat in the back seat with Eli, her backpack clutched securely on her lap. She watched the familiar streets of their neighborhood give way to the highway, morning commuters filling the lanes around them. You excited to see Grandma Eleanor? Her mother asked, turning in the passenger seat to look at her children. So excited, Zoe replied, her eyes bright with anticipation. I can't wait to show her my science fair medal and try her famous gumbo. And I'm going to catch frogs with Cousin Jade, Eli added enthusiastically. Dr. Jackson chuckled, catching Zoe's eye in the rearview mirror. Just remember, when we get to the airport, stay close, follow instructions, and if we get separated for any reason, you know the meeting point. Customer service desk at our gate, Zoe recited confidently. That's my girl, he replied with a smile that conveyed not just approval, but trust in her capability. As Metropolitan International Airport came into view, a massive structure of glass and steel stretching across the horizon, Zoe felt butterflies of excitement in her stomach. With annual passenger traffic of 23.7 million people, it was the 7th busiest airport in the country. Today, she would be one of those millions, embarking on an adventure that, though she couldn't know it yet, would become far more significant than a simple family vacation. Metropolitan International Airport buzzed with early morning activity as the Jackson family pulled up to the departure area. The massive glass facade reflected the rising sun, creating a golden glow that momentarily distracted Zoe from her excitement. Skycaps in Navy uniforms directed traffic, while passengers wheeled luggage through automatic doors into the climate-controlled terminal. Remember, Jackson said as they unloaded their suitcases, stay together through check-in. If we get separated, we meet at gate DT4. The family made their way to the premium check-in area. Jackson's status with the airline affording them shorter lines and expedited service. The ticketing agent, a middle-aged woman with a practiced smile, processed their boarding passes efficiently. Dr. Jackson, she said, recognizing his name with a slight widening of her eyes. Thank you for your service with the FAA. We have you and your family seated together in row 7, but there seems to be a slight issue with the seating assignment for your son. Dr. Jackson frowned. What sort of issue? It appears we have him in 7C rather than 7D, which would put him across the aisle instead of directly next to you. I can try to fix this, but it may take a few minutes. Vanessa checked her watch. We're still ahead of schedule. Should we wait? Jackson looked at Zoe thoughtfully. Actually, Zoe could go ahead to the gate while we sort this out. She knows the way, and it would give her a chance to practice her independent travel skills. Zoe stood a little straighter, recognizing this for what it was, a vote of confidence in her maturity and responsibility. Are you comfortable with that, Zoe? Her mother asked. Absolutely, Zoe replied, trying to sound as professional as possible. Doctor? Jackson knelt to her eye level, something he always did when he wanted to convey the importance of his words. Gate D24 is just past security and to the right. You have your boarding pass and passport ready. Front pocket, Dad, she confirmed, patting her backpack. Good. When you get to the gate, check in with the gate agent so they know you've arrived. Tell them your parents are coming shortly. We'll be right behind you. Probably no more than 10 minutes. Zoe nodded, absorbing his instructions with the seriousness they deserved. You've got this, he said, giving her shoulder a reassuring squeeze. You're a Jackson. We handle our business. With those words of encouragement, Zoe headed toward the security checkpoint, her passport and boarding pass clutched firmly in her hand. The TSA area stretched before her, a maze of stanchions and retractable belts guiding passengers through the screening process. Signs overhead displayed instructions for document verification, shoe removal, and electronic screening. Zoe joined the line, watching carefully as passengers ahead of her presented their documentation to the TSA officer. When her turn came, she stepped forward confidently. Good morning, she said clearly, handing over her boarding pass and passport just as she'd seen adults do. The TSA officer, a woman with kind eyes, took the documents with a smile. Good morning, young lady. Flying by yourself today? No, ma'am, my parents are finishing check-in. They'll be right behind me. The officer nodded approvingly at her polite response. Well, you're doing a fine job. Please remove your shoes and place your backpack in the bin for screening. Zoe followed the instructions precisely, moving through the scanner without incident. On the other side, she collected her belongings efficiently, retied her shoes, and tucked her passport safely back into her backpack's front pocket. The concourse stretched before her, a gleaming thoroughfare lined with shops, restaurants, and gates. Announcements echoed overhead, multilingual instructions mingling with boarding calls and security notifications. The smell of coffee and cinnamon rolls wafted from nearby cafes, tempting early morning travelers. Zoe checked the overhead signs, gates D1, D30. She followed the arrow, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished floor. All around her, the airport hummed with activity. Business travelers in suits speaking urgently into phones, families herding children and luggage, airline staff in crisp uniforms moving purposefully between gates. Excuse me, she said politely to a passing janitor. Is gate D24 this way? Yes, miss, he replied with a smile. Just keep going straight, about 5 more minutes walk. Thank you, she responded with the good manners her parents had instilled in her. As she walked, Zoe felt a surge of pride. Here she was, navigating one of the country's busiest airports on her own, handling her travel documents responsibly, interacting confidently with adults. The independence felt exhilarating. Through the massive windows to her right, she could see planes taxiing across the tarmac, their massive forms gleaming in the morning sunlight. A Boeing 777 was just pushing back from a gate, its engines beginning their low, powerful hum. Someday, she thought, she might travel on one of those international flights to distant countries, London, Tokyo, Johannesburg, using the very passport she carried. Gate D24 came into view, a curved counter with the airline's logo displayed on screens overhead. The waiting area was already half filled with passengers, some scrolling through phones, others reading books or newspapers, a few dozing in the uncomfortable seats. Behind the counter stood a gate agent, a white woman with blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. A name tag on her navy blue uniform read, Heather Reynolds. She appeared to be in her early 30s, her face set in an expression of professional detachment as she typed rapidly on her computer terminal. Zoe took a deep breath, mentally rehearsing what she would say. Good morning. My name is Zoe Jackson. I'm checking in at the gate while my parents finish resolving a seating issue. They'll be here shortly. With her script prepared and her documents ready, Zoe approached the counter, standing tall despite her height of just under 5 feet. This was her moment to demonstrate the independence and responsibility her parents had been teaching her. What she couldn't know was that this routine interaction was about to become anything but routine. Excuse me, Zoe said, her voice clear and polite as she approached the counter at gate DD4. I'd like to check in, please. My parents will be here shortly. Heather Reynolds barely glanced up from her computer screen. Her fingers continued typing for several seconds before she reluctantly shifted her attention to the young girl standing before her counter. Her gaze flicked over Zoe, taking in her natural hair styled in 2 neat puffs, her purple backpack, her sensible traveling outfit of jeans and a button-up shirt. and something in her expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Where are your parents?" Heather asked, her tone suggesting Zoe was somehow breaking protocol by approaching alone. "They're finishing up at the main check-in desk. There was an issue with my brother's seat assignment. They asked me to come ahead and check in at the gate." Heather's eyes narrowed slightly. "You need a parent or guardian to check in if you're under 12. My dad said, boarding pass and ID. Heather interrupted, extending her hand with an impatient gesture. Zoe carefully removed her passport and boarding pass from her backpack's front pocket, just as she had practiced, and handed them over with both hands, the respectful manner her father had taught her. Heather took the documents, her movements brusque and impatient. She glanced at the boarding pass first, and a flash of something, surprised disapproval, crossed her face when she saw the first-class designation. "This says first class," she stated flatly, as if questioning the accuracy of the document rather than simply confirming information. "Yes, ma'am," Zoe replied. "We're in row 7. Heather's attention shifted to the passport, her lips thinning as she flipped it open. She studied Zoe's photo page with unusual intensity, turning it slightly as if checking for watermarks or other security features. "This doesn't look right," she said, her voice taking on an edge. "I'm sorry," Zoe replied, confusion evident in her tone. By now, several nearby passengers had begun to notice the interaction. A middle-aged Hispanic man in a business suit, Miguel Ramirez, looked up from his laptop with a slight frown. An elderly white woman, Hannah Peterson, paused in her knitting, her hands going still as she observed the exchange. "This passport," Heather continued, her voice rising slightly. "Where did you get it?" The question was so unexpected that Zoe momentarily struggled to respond. From the State Department, my dad helped me apply for it 6 months ago." Heather's expression darkened. "Don't get smart with me, young lady." She held the passport up to the light, turning it this way and that in an exaggerated show of inspection. "These have very specific security features. This doesn't feel right." Zoe's heart began to race. Was there something wrong with her passport? Had it been damaged somehow? But no, she checked it just this morning. It was perfectly fine. "I don't understand," she said, her voice smaller now. "It's my passport. It's real." "Mm-hmm," Heather hummed skeptically. Her gaze moved from the passport to Zoe and back again. "And you're flying first class." The implication in her tone was clear enough that even at 11, Zoe understood what was happening. This wasn't about the passport at all. This was about who Heather thought Zoe was. Or wasn't. Miguel Ramirez had set his laptop aside now, his attention fully on the interaction at the counter, quietly, almost imperceptibly. He removed his phone from his pocket and began recording. Hannah Peterson had also sensed something wrong. She set her knitting in her lap, her weathered hands clasped tightly as she watched the scene unfold with growing concern. "Yes," Zoe confirmed, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm traveling with my family. My parents will be here any minute." "Sure they will," Heather replied, the skepticism in her voice unmistakable. She held the passport between her hands now, her fingers positioned at the edges of the cover. "You know what, I think I need to check this with security. Improperly obtained travel documents are a serious offense." Before Zoe could respond, before she could explain or protest or even reach out to take back what was rightfully hers, Heather did something unthinkable. With deliberate, calculated movements, she gripped the passport firmly with both hands and tore it straight down the middle. The sound of tearing paper cut through the ambient noise of the gate area like a gunshot. Zoe froze, her mouth open in shock, her eyes fixed on the destroyed document in Heather's hands. The navy blue cover was split, the golden eagle emblem torn in half, the photo page partially separated from the binding. "Oops," Heather said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Looks like this was already damaged. I can't accept a damaged passport. These need to be presented properly." Zoe couldn't move, couldn't speak. The world seemed to narrow to this single point of horror. Her passport, the document her father had helped her obtain, the symbol of her citizenship and identity, deliberately destroyed before her eyes. "What on earth are you doing?" Hannah Peterson's voice cut through Zoe's shock. The elderly woman had risen to her feet, her knitting forgotten. "That child's passport was perfectly fine until you tore it." Heather's head snapped toward Hannah. "Ma'am, please stay out of this." This is an official airline matter. It's assault is what it is, Hannah replied sharply. You just destroyed federal property. Miguel Ramirez had stood as well, his phone now clearly visible as he recorded. I have this all on video, he said, his accent slight but his voice firm. The passport was undamaged when she handed it to you. Other passengers were noticing now. Some pulled out their phones, some whispered to each other, some looked away uncomfortably. The atmosphere at Gate D24 had transformed from routine pre-boarding tedium to tense confrontation in a matter of seconds. Heather glanced around, seeming to realize for the first time that her actions had witnesses. Something flickered in her expression. Uncertainty, perhaps, or the first inkling that she had miscalculated badly. But it was quickly replaced by defensive anger. This passport was clearly compromised, she insisted, dropping the torn pieces onto the counter. I was following protocol for suspected fraudulent documents. Zoe stared at the torn halves of her passport, unable to process what had just happened. She had watched Heather tear it. There had been nothing wrong with it. Why would she do this? How could she just lie about it? Zoe started, her voice trembling. You need to move aside now, Heather interrupted sharply. Next passenger, please. A cold feeling washed over Zoe. Not just shock or confusion, but a deeper understanding that she was being dismissed, that her words didn't matter, that this adult had decided she was unworthy of basic respect. It was a feeling no child should have to experience, yet one that too many children of color learn early. Miguel approached the counter, positioning himself slightly between Zoe and Heather. Young lady, he said gently to Zoe, do you have a phone? Can you call your parents? Zoe nodded numbly, reaching into her pocket for her phone. Her fingers felt clumsy, disconnected from her brain as shock continued to wash through her system. This is completely unacceptable, Hannah said, moving to stand beside Zoe in a protective gesture. I've been flying with this airline for 40 years, and I have never seen such disgraceful behavior from staff. Heather's face flushed with anger. If you continue to disrupt gate operations, I'll have to call security. Please do, Miguel replied calmly. I think they need to see this video. As the confrontation escalated, Zoe managed to unlock her phone. With trembling fingers, she pulled up her father's contact information. The photo of him in his official FAA uniform stared back at her from the screen, a reminder of who he was, of the authority he carried, of the protection he could provide. She pressed the call button. While the phone rang, she looked again at the torn pieces of her passport on the counter. The gilded eagle emblem was split down the middle, the photo page showing her smiling face now hanging partially detached from the binding. Something inside Zoe shifted, grief giving way to a spark of indignation. This wasn't right. This wasn't fair. Her father's voice came through the phone, warm and confident. Hey, sweetheart, did you make it to the gate already? Zoe took a deep breath, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. Dad, she said, her voice stronger than she expected. I need you to come to gate D24 right now. The gate agent just tore up my passport. The silence on the other end lasted only a second, but it felt much longer. She did what? Daughter Jackson's voice had changed completely. The warmth replaced by a controlled intensity that Zoe recognized from the rare occasions when her father was truly angry. She tore my passport in half, Dad. She said it was damaged, but it wasn't. She did it right in front of me. People saw it. A man is recording it on his phone. In the background, Zoe could hear her mother's concerned voice asking what was happening. Then her father spoke again, his tone precise and authoritative. Zoe, listen carefully. Stay exactly where you are. Don't move from that gate. I'm coming right now. Can you put the person who's recording on the phone for a moment? Zoe held the phone out to Miguel. My dad wants to speak with you, sir. Miguel took the phone, introducing himself briefly before listening intently. His expression shifted from concern to something like surprised respect as he heard who was on the other end of the line. Yes, Dr. Jackson, I understand completely. Yes, I'll stay right here with her until you arrive. No, the gate agent is still here. Yes, I have everything recorded. He handed the phone back to Zoe, who put it to her ear again. Dad, she said, her voice small. I'm on my way, Zoe. 5 minutes, maximum. You're doing great. Just stay calm and stay put. I'm handling this. His tone carried absolute certainty, the promise of swift and decisive action. As Zoe ended the call, she noticed Heather watching her with narrowed eyes. Had she heard Zoe mention her father's title? Did she understand what was coming? The gate agent's expression suggested only irritation, not comprehension of the storm about to break over her head. Is there a problem here? A new voice joined the conversation, a uniformed security officer who had approached, drawn by the unusual commotion at the gate. This gate agent deliberately destroyed this child's passport, Hannah said immediately, pointing an accusing finger at Heather. It was completely undamaged when she handed it over. The security officer looked confused, turning to Heather for explanation. The document was compromised, Heather insisted. I was following standard protocol for suspected fraudulent documentation. She's lying, Miguel said firmly, holding up his phone. I have video evidence of the entire interaction. The security officer looked increasingly uncomfortable, caught between conflicting accounts. Perhaps we should move this discussion somewhere more private. No, Zoe said, finding her voice at last. My father said to stay right here. He'll be here in 5 minutes. He's Dr. Marcus Jackson, Chief Federal Aviation Administration Inspector. Something in the security officer's expression changed, a flicker of recognition, perhaps, or the sudden realization that this situation might be more significant than a routine disturbance. Heather's face remained impassive, but a slight tensing of her shoulders suggested the name might have registered. If it did, she gave no other indication, continuing to sort boarding passes as if nothing unusual had occurred. The 5 minutes that followed were among the longest of Zoe's young life. She stood near the counter, supported by the kindness of strangers, Miguel with his phone still recording, Hannah with her grandmotherly presence, and now a small crowd of passengers who had become impromptu witnesses and advocates. And then, cutting through the tension like a blade, came the sound of purposeful footsteps. Dr. Marcus Jackson strode down the concourse, his wife and son slightly behind him, his expression set in lines of controlled fury that anyone who knew him would recognize as the calm before a very specific storm. In his professional life, overseeing aviation safety for 47 major airports, he had perfected the art of measured response, of authority exercised with precision rather than emotion. That authority was palpable now as he approached gate D24, his eyes immediately finding his daughter among the crowd. The chief FAA inspector had arrived, and nothing at this gate would be the same again. Sir Marcus Jackson had just finished resolving the seating issue at the main check-in counter when his phone rang. Seeing Zoe's contact photo appear on the screen, he felt a momentary pride. His daughter was following protocol, checking in as instructed. Hey, sweetheart, did you make it to the gate already? He answered, his tone warm and encouraging. The pause before Zoe responded was his first indication that something was wrong. Dad, Zoe's voice came through, strained but controlled. I need you to come to gate D24 right now. The gate agent just tore up my passport. Marcus Jackson went completely still, summoning the controlled dignity that Solomon Northup maintained in 12 years a slave, even when faced with unthinkable injustice. His mind processing what he'd just heard. She did what he asked, his voice dropping to a lower register, the tone he reserved for serious aviation safety violations. She tore my passport in half. Dad, she said it was damaged, but it wasn't. She did it right in front of me. People saw it. A man is recording it on his phone. In his 15 years with the Federal Aviation Administration, Dr. Jackson had handled numerous crises, runway incursions, security breaches, even a mid-air engine failure that had required his immediate intervention. None of those situations had triggered the precise combination of parental protection and professional outrage that surged through him now. Vanessa noticed the change in her husband's demeanor instantly. Marcus, what's happening? She asked, concern evident in her voice. He held up one finger, a request for a moment to gather critical information. Zoe, listen carefully. Stay exactly where you are. Don't move from that gate. I'm coming right now. Can you put the person who's recording on the phone for a moment? When a man's voice came on the line, Dr. Jackson shifted seamlessly into his professional capacity. This is Dr. Marcus Jackson, Chief Federal Aviation Administration Inspector. I need you to confirm what my daughter just told me. Yes, sir, Miguel Ramirez replied, respect evident in his tone. I witnessed the entire interaction. Your daughter approached the gate agent politely. She presented her documents correctly. The agent questioned her first-class status, then claimed there was something wrong with the passport. Then, and I have this recorded clearly, she deliberately tore the passport in half. Are you willing to provide that recording as the evidence in an official investigation? Dr. Jackson asked. Absolutely, sir. Thank you. Please stay with my daughter until I arrive. I'll be there in 5 minutes. After Miguel returned the phone to Zoe and Dr. Aram, Jackson confirmed she was okay. He ended the call and turned to his wife and son. Someone at gate D24 just destroyed Zoe's passport, he explained, his voice controlled but tight with anger. Deliberately tore it in half. Vanessa's eyes widened in shock. What? Why would anyone? That's what we're about to find out. Dr. Jackson interrupted, already striding toward the security checkpoint. Eli, stay close to your mother. As they moved rapidly through the terminal, Dr. Jackson made 3 precise strategic calls, each less than 30 seconds long. First, to William Hayes, director of Metropolitan International Airport. Will Marcus Jackson, I need you at gate D24 immediately. A gate agent just destroyed my daughter's federal passport. This is not a request. Second, to Sarah Morales, his deputy director at the FAA. Sarah, I'm initiating an incident report. Gate agent at Metropolitan International. Gate D24 destroyed a federal passport. I need documentation procedures activated. Yes, it was my daughter's. No, that doesn't change protocol. We do this by the book. Third, to Thomas Rivera at the State Department's Passport Services Agent Rivera, Dr. Marcus Jackson, FAA. I'm reporting the destruction of a Yucas passport by airline personnel at Metropolitan International. I need emergency replacement protocols initiated. The passport holder is my 11-year-old daughter. By the time they cleared security, expedited by Dr. Jackson's federal credentials, he had mobilized a multi-agency response. His mind was cycling through applicable federal regulations 18 U.S.C. 1543 for passport destruction, TSAS E17, 3 protocols for security incidents at federally regulated airports, 14 CFR 139, 305 for operations standards violations. Marcus, Vanessa said quietly as they approached Concourse D, I know you're in full professional mode right now, but remember, Zoe is watching. How you handle this will teach her something important. Dr. Jackson's stride faltered for just a moment. His wife was right, of course. This wasn't just about enforcing federal regulations or exercising his authority as a senior FAA official. This was about their daughter, how she would interpret this experience, what she would learn about justice, power, and standing up for oneself. I understand, he replied, his voice softening slightly. I'll handle this properly. As they rounded the corner toward gate DT4, the scene came into view. Zoe standing near the counter, looking smaller than her 11 years but with her chin raised. 2 adults flanking her protectively, an elderly white woman and a middle-aged Hispanic man still holding his phone at recording angle, a security officer looking increasingly uncomfortable, and behind the counter, a blonde gate agent whose posture radiated defensive hostility. Dr. Jackson took a deep breath, centering himself. In this moment, he was both a father whose child had been mistreated and a federal official whose jurisdiction included every aspect of this airport's operations. He needed to balance those identities carefully, to exercise authority without abusing it, to seek justice rather than revenge. There she is, Eli whispered, pointing toward his sister. I see her, Dr. Jackson replied, then to his wife. Let me take point on this. If I miss anything, you'll catch it. Vanessa nodded. As a civil rights attorney, she knew exactly what violations had occurred here, both legal and ethical. I've got your back. They moved forward as a unit, a family united in purpose. Dr. Jackson's footsteps echoed slightly in the terminal, the sound of authority approaching. Several passengers looked up, sensing the arrival of someone significant, something in his bearing, his focused expression, the deliberate confidence of his movements communicating importance without a word being spoken. Zoe saw them first. The relief that washed over her face was palpable, her shoulders relaxing slightly from their tense position. Dad, she called, her voice stronger now that reinforcements had arrived. Dr. Jackson reached her in 4 more strides, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. While his eyes quickly assessed the situation, the torn passport on the counter, the security officer's uncertain posture, the gate agent's defensive stance, the supportive witnesses, the growing crowd of onlookers. "Zoe," he said, his voice gentle but steady. "Are you okay?" She nodded, standing a little straighter. "Yes, I did what you said. I stayed right here." "You did perfectly," he assured her, before turning his full attention to the gate agent behind the counter. His expression shifted subtly, from concerned father to federal authority. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of both identities. "I'm Dr. Marcus Jackson, Chief Inspector for the Federal Aviation Administration. Who authorized you to destroy a federal document?" Heather Reynolds stared at Dr. Jackson, her expression cycling rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and the first flickering of comprehension that she might have made a catastrophic error. She straightened her posture defensively behind the counter. "I was following protocol for suspected fraudulent documentation," she said, her voice less certain than before. "Protocol," Dr. Jackson repeated, his tone dangerously calm. "Please cite the specific airline protocol that authorizes gate agents to physically destroy United States government-issued passports." Heather blinked rapidly, caught off guard by the direct challenge. There were irregularities with the document." "What specific irregularities?" Dr. Jackson pressed. "It didn't seem right." "Didn't seem right," and he echoed, each word deliberate and measured. "And you determined this how? Through what training and document authentication? With what specialized equipment?" The security officer, who had been hovering uncertainly, now stepped forward. "Dr. Jackson, perhaps we could move this discussion." "No," Dr. Jackson said firmly. "We will not be moving this discussion to a back room where it can be minimized or dismissed. Federal law under 18 U.S.C. 1543 prohibits the willful destruction of passport documents. This incident will be handled here, transparently, with full accountability." He turned to Miguel Ramirez. "Sir, thank you for staying with my daughter. May I see the video you recorded?" Miguel nodded, handing over his phone. "Doctor." Jackson watched the footage with intense focus, Zoe approaching politely, presenting her documents correctly. Heather's visible reaction to the first-class designation, the deliberate examination of the passport, and then the unmistakable moment when Heather gripped the document and tore it down the middle. "This is definitive," Dr. Jackson said, returning the phone. "Would you be willing to provide a copy of this to federal authorities?" "Of course," Miguel replied. "I'll send it wherever you need." Dr. Jackson reached into his jacket pocket and produced his business card. "Please send it to this email address. The federal incident number will be JFK 1623. Vanessa had moved to Zoe's side, one arm around her daughter's shoulders while Eli stood close by, unusually quiet as he observed the unfolding situation with wide eyes. Dr. Jackson pulled out his phone and made another call, speaking in clear, precise terms. "Director Hayes, this is Marcus Jackson. I'm at Gate D28. The situation involves the deliberate destruction of a federal passport by one of your gate agents. I need your immediate presence, along with your head of security and your airline liaison. We're initiating formal federal investigation procedures." He paused, listening. 5 minutes. "Thank you." Heather's face had paled considerably. "I was just doing my job," she protested weakly. "Your job includes destroying federal documents issued to minors?" Dr. Jackson asked, his voice carrying just enough edge to make several nearby passengers wince in sympathy. "Interesting. I'd like to review that job description." Hannah Peterson, the elderly woman who had first spoken up for Zoe, approached Dr. Jackson. "I witnessed everything. Sir, that passport was perfectly intact when your daughter handed it over. This woman," she pointed accusingly at Heather, "tore it deliberately and then lied about it being damaged." "Thank you, ma'am," Dr. Jackson replied with genuine appreciation. "Would you be willing to provide a formal statement?" "Absolutely." Hannah nodded firmly. "I've been traveling for 45 years, and I've never seen anything like this. It's high time someone was held accountable." Minded Dixon turned back to Heather, who was now visibly struggling to maintain her composure. "Ms. Reynolds," he said, reading her name tag. "I'm going to explain exactly what's happening now. Metropolitan International Airport operates under federal jurisdiction. The destruction of a federal document, especially a passport, is a federal offense under multiple statutes. As the Chief Inspector for the FAA, I am initiating a formal investigation into this incident. He gestured to the torn passport still lying on the counter. That document is now evidence in a federal investigation. Do not touch it. Do not attempt to dispose of it. Security will be securing it momentarily. Heather's hand, which had been hovering near the torn passport as if considering moving it, quickly withdrew. Dr. Jackson continued, his voice carrying to the growing crowd of interested passengers. This investigation will include review of all security footage, witness statements, and an examination of your employment history and previous passenger interactions. The State Department has been notified about the destruction of a federal passport. TSA officials have been alerted to a security protocol breach. He paused, allowing the gravity of the situation to settle over the gate area. This is not a minor customer service issue. This is a federal incident with potential criminal implications. A commotion at the edge of the gathering crowd signaled the arrival of airport officials. William Hayes, the 58-year-old director of Metropolitan International, approached rapidly, flanked by a security team and a woman in an airline management uniform. Marcus, Hayes said, extending his hand. Despite the circumstances, there was genuine respect in the greeting. These were two professionals who had worked together on numerous aviation safety initiatives. I came as soon as I got your call. This is Olivia Gardner, our chief of security, and Regina Alvarez, the airline's customer service director. Dr. Jackson shook hands with each, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the personal nature of the incident. Thank you for your prompt response. Will, the situation is straightforward, but serious. My daughter approached this gate with her valid passport. The gate agent, he indicated Heather, questioned her documentation, then deliberately destroyed her passport. We have video evidence, multiple witnesses, and I'll be requesting security footage from your system as well. Hayes turned to Heather, his expression grave. Is this accurate, Ms. Reynolds? Heather's defensive posture crumbled slightly under the combined scrutiny of airport leadership. I was following protocol for suspicious documentation. What specifically was suspicious about it? Hayes pressed. It didn't look right. In what way? Heather hesitated, clearly struggling to articulate any legitimate concern. The photo didn't seem to match, and she's so young to be in first class. I thought it might be fraudulent. Miguel stepped forward again, his phone still recording. Sir, if I may, I watched the entire interaction. The gate agent barely looked at the passport before claiming it was suspicious. Then she made a comment about the first-class ticket that suggested she didn't believe someone like this young lady should be in that cabin. Someone like her, Hayes repeated, his gaze sharpening. Miguel met his eyes steadily. I believe race was a factor in this incident, sir. The gate agent's behavior changed visibly when she saw this was a young black girl with a first-class ticket. Vanessa Jackson, who had been observing silently until now, spoke up. As a civil rights attorney, I can tell you that what occurred here meets the legal threshold for discriminatory treatment. The destruction of my daughter's passport wasn't just a violation of federal document statutes. It was an act of targeted aggression based on both racial and age-related bias. Olivia Gardner, the security chief, had been examining the torn passport on the counter. She looked up with a professional grimace. This is definitely a valid U.S. passport. The security features are intact, or were, until it was torn. There's nothing here that would trigger legitimate suspicion. Regina Alvarez, the airline representative, appeared physically pained by what she was hearing. Ms. Reynolds, please step away from the counter. We need to speak privately. Actually, Jackson interjected. I must request that Ms. Reynolds remain here until formal statements have been taken. This is now a federal investigation, and all parties need to be properly interviewed. Hayes nodded in agreement. Of course. Olivia, please arrange for statements to be taken from all witnesses, and secure that passport as evidence. Dr. Jackson turned to his daughter, who had been watching the proceedings with attentive eyes. He knelt down to her level, speaking gently but with clear purpose. Zoe, I'm so proud of how you've handled this. Now I need to ask you something important. Are you okay with us pursuing this formally? This might mean giving statements, possibly even testifying later. It's completely your choice. Zoe thought for a moment, her young face serious. Will it help make sure this doesn't happen to other kids? Jackson felt a surge of pride at her question. Her first concern was for others, not herself. Yes, it will. That's exactly why these procedures exist. Then I want to do it, Zoe said firmly. It wasn't right. What she did, not just to me, but how she made me feel. Like I didn't belong there. Vanessa squeezed her daughter's shoulder supportively. That's very brave, sweetheart. Dr. Jackson stood up, addressing Hayes again. We'll need a private room for taking statements, and I'd like to request all security footage from this gate area for the past hour. Of course, Hayes agreed. We'll use the executive conference room near my office, and I've already instructed our security team to preserve all video evidence. Jackson nodded appreciatively. Thank you. I should also inform you that I've contacted Thomas Rivera at the State Department's passport services. He's initiating emergency replacement procedures for Zoe's passport, so our family can still make our flight. As if on cue, Dr. Jackson's phone buzzed with a text from Rivera. Emergency passport team en route. Added 20 minutes to airport admin offices. The systematic response was now fully in motion. Federal agencies coordinating, airport protocols activated, airline management engaged. What had begun as a simple act of discrimination was transforming into a textbook case of accountability in action. Heather Reynolds stood frozen behind the gate counter, watching as her routine workday collapsed around her. The realization seemed to be dawning on her face. She hadn't just mistreated an ordinary passenger. She had destroyed a federal document belonging to the daughter of perhaps the most powerful aviation authority figure in the region. And she had done it on camera, in front of multiple witnesses, without any legitimate justification. As Security Chief Gardner began organizing the witness statement process, Dr. Jackson turned to his family. This will take some time, but we're going to handle it properly. By the book. Eli tugged at his father's sleeve. Are we still going to see Grandma? Yes, buddy, Dr. Jackson assured him. We might be a little delayed, but we're definitely still going. Some things are even more important than being on time. He glanced at Zoe, who was standing a little straighter now. Her initial shock replaced by a growing understanding of the significance of what was happening. In her eyes, he could see a new awareness forming, an understanding that systems could work, that justice could be pursued, that her voice mattered. It was a lesson he had always hoped to teach her, though he would have preferred different circumstances. Let's go give our statements, he said gently. Then we'll get your new passport, and we'll continue our trip. This is important, but it doesn't have to ruin our day. As the Jackson family followed Hayes toward the administrative offices, passengers at Gate D24 watched with a mixture of awe and satisfaction. Whispers spread through the waiting area. That's the FAA Chief Inspector. She tore up his daughter's passport. Federal investigation. She's definitely getting fired. The story was already beginning to spread beyond the immediate vicinity. Miguel's video was uploading to social media. Passengers were texting friends and family about what they'd witnessed, and the official response was creating ripples throughout the airport's operations. What Heather Reynolds had likely intended as a moment of petty power, putting a young black girl in her place, had instead become a catalyst for systematic accountability. The machinery of justice was now in motion, turning its gears with the precision and purpose that Dr. Marcus Jackson had spent his career perfecting. The executive conference room at Metropolitan International Airport hummed with activity. Located on the administrative level above the main concourse, the space was designed for high-level meetings, a long mahogany table surrounded by ergonomic chairs, wall-mounted screens displaying security footage, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the airfield where planes taxied in the morning sun. Dr. Jackson sat at one end of the table, his posture straight but not rigid, his expression focused as he reviewed the incident report form on his tablet. Across from him, Zoe sat between her mother and brother, occasionally glancing at the security footage playing on one of the screens, the silent replay of her interaction with Heather Reynolds from 3 different camera angles. William Hayes stood near the head of the table, conferring quietly with Olivia Gardner, while 2 TSA officials reviewed their own protocols on tablets. Regina Alvarez sat with a look of controlled distress, occasionally making notes in what appeared to be an incident log. The door opened, and Thomas Rivera entered, a trim Hispanic man in his late 30s wearing a Department of State identification badge. He carried a specialized case containing equipment for emergency passport issuance. Dr. Jackson, he greeted, extending his hand. Agent Rivera, State Department. I came as soon as I received your call. Thank you for your prompt response. Agent Rivera, Dr. Jackson replied, standing to shake his hand. This is my daughter, Zoe. Rivera approached Zoe with a professional but gentle demeanor. Hello, Zoe. I understand you had a difficult experience today. I'm here to help get you a replacement passport so you can continue your trip. Zoe nodded, her eyes showing appreciation for his kind tone. Thank you, sir. While Agent Rivera begins the replacement process. Dr. Jackson addressed the room. I'd like to review what we've established so far. He gestured to the security footage now paused on the central screen. Airport surveillance has confirmed what witness videos already showed. At approximately 8:12 a.m., my daughter approached Gate D24 and presented her valid passport and boarding pass to Gate Agent Heather Reynolds. After minimal examination, Ms. Reynolds deliberately tore the passport in half, claimed it was already damaged, and attempted to deny boarding. Director Hayes nodded grimly. The footage is unambiguous. There is no question about what occurred. We've taken statements from 7 witnesses, Olivia Gardner added, including Mr. Ramirez and Mrs. Peterson, who intervened on Zoe's behalf. All accounts are consistent with the video evidence. Regina Alvarez cleared her throat. Dr. Jackson, on behalf of the airline, I want to express our deepest apologies for this incident. This behavior violates every standard of customer service we maintain, not to mention federal regulations regarding the handling of travel documents. Apologies are appropriate, Dr. Jackson acknowledged, but I'm more interested in systemic solutions. Ms. Alvarez, I'd like to see Ms. Reynolds' employment history, specifically any previous passenger complaints. Alvarez hesitated briefly. That would normally require a formal request through our legal department. This is a federal investigation involving the destruction of a government document, Dr. Jackson interrupted calmly. Under 49 SC 40113, the FAA has broad authority to inspect records related to air transportation safety and security incidents. I can have a formal subpoena issued, but that would unnecessarily complicate what could be a collaborative process. The subtle reminder of his authority had the intended effect. Alvarez nodded quickly. Of course. I'll have HR send over her complete file immediately. Thank you, Dr. Jackson said. Now, regarding next steps, he was interrupted by a notification on Director Hayes' tablet. Hayes glanced at the screen, his expression tightening. The first news crews have arrived outside the terminal. Apparently, Mr. Ramirez's video has been shared extensively on social media. It's already at 47,000 views. Jackson exchanged a look with Vanessa, who nodded slightly. They had anticipated this development. In the age of smartphones and social media, incidents like this rarely remain contained. We should prepare a statement, Hayes continued, to get ahead of this before speculation runs wild. Agreed, Dr. Jackson replied. But let's be absolutely clear about what happened. This wasn't just a customer service failure. It was the deliberate destruction of a federal document, potentially motivated by racial bias. Vanessa leaned forward. As both a mother and an attorney, I want to emphasize that while we appreciate the urgency of addressing public relations concerns, our priority is ensuring that our daughter receives justice and that appropriate accountability measures are implemented to prevent similar incidents. Agent Rivera had set up his equipment at the far end of the table and was now taking a new passport photo of Zoe. Stand straight, looking directly at the camera, he instructed gently. No smiling, please. Zoe complied, her expression serious as the camera flashed. Perfect, Rivera said. Now I'll need your birth certificate and your father's identification to verify your citizenship status. Vanessa produced the documents from her purse, having brought them as backup for the family's travel. As Rivera processed them, he explained the procedure to Zoe. Normally, a replacement passport would take weeks to process. But in cases of emergency, like travel disruption due to theft or destruction, we can issue a temporary passport valid for 1 year. After that, you'll need to apply for a standard replacement. Zoe nodded her understanding. Will it look different from my original passport? It will have an emergency issuance designation, Rivera confirmed. But otherwise, it functions exactly the same. It's still an official U.S. passport with all the same protections and privileges. While this conversation continued, the door opened again, and an HR representative entered with a digital file. Ms. Reynolds' employment records, as requested, she announced, sending the file to Regina Alvarez's tablet. Alvarez reviewed the information, her expression growing increasingly troubled. "Dr. Jackson, I think you should see this," she said finally, sliding the tablet across the table. Dr. Jackson examined the file carefully, his face remaining neutral despite the concerning information before him. 17 previous passenger complaints in the past year alone, he noted. 14 involving passengers of color or with non-Anglo names. 3 formal reprimands for unprofessional conduct and discourteous treatment of passengers. Yet she remained in a customer-facing position with authority over travel documentation. He looked up at Alvarez, his gaze steady. This suggests a pattern, not an isolated incident. Alvarez looked genuinely distressed. "I wasn't aware of this history. This file would typically be reviewed by local management, not corporate customer service, which highlights a systemic issue," Dr. Jackson pointed out. "If complaint patterns aren't being escalated appropriately, how many other employees with similar histories are still interacting with passengers?" The implications hung heavily in the air. This wasn't just about Heather Reynolds anymore. It was about the structures that had allowed her behavior to continue unchecked. Director Hayes, sensing the growing scope of the situation, addressed the room. "I believe we need to expand our response beyond this specific incident. Dr. Jackson, would you be willing to consult on a broader review of our customer service protocols, particularly regarding document handling and potential bias issues?" Before Dr. Jackson could respond, the door opened once more. Heather Reynolds entered, escorted by a security officer. Her earlier defiance had faded, replaced by visible anxiety as she took in the assembled officials and the security footage still displayed on the wall screens. Clear evidence of her actions frozen in high-resolution detail. "Ms. Reynolds," Director Hayes said, his tone formal. "Please take a seat. We're conducting an official investigation into this morning's incident at Gate DD4. Heather sat stiffly at the far end of the table, her eyes darting between the faces of those present, lingering briefly on Zoe before quickly looking away. "Ms. Reynolds," Olivia Gardner began, "we've reviewed security footage and witness statements regarding your interaction with Zoe Jackson this morning. The evidence clearly shows you deliberately destroyed her passport. Would you like to explain your actions?" Heather shifted uncomfortably. "I was following procedure for suspicious documents." "What specifically made you suspicious?" Gardner interrupted. The passport didn't look right, and she's so young to be traveling in first class. I thought it might be fraudulent." "Did you use any specialized equipment to examine the passport?" Gardner pressed. "No, but did you contact a supervisor before taking action?" "There wasn't time." "Did you follow the TSA protocol for suspected fraudulent documentation, which requires notification of security personnel rather than destruction of the document?" Heather's composure cracked further. "I made a judgment call." Jackson, who had been watching this exchange silently, finally spoke. "Ms. Reynolds, I've reviewed your employment history, including the 17 previous complaints against you, 14 of which involve passengers of color. Does that strike you as coincidental?" The direct question landed like a physical blow. Heather's face flushed, then paled. "Those situations were all different. They weren't about race, yet the statistical pattern suggests otherwise," Dr. Jackson replied calmly. "When faced with a young black girl traveling first class with proper documentation, you made assumptions that led you to destroy federal property rather than follow established protocols. How would you characterize that decision now, with the benefit of hindsight?" The room fell silent, all eyes on Heather as she struggled to formulate a response that wouldn't further incriminate her. For the first time, genuine confusion crossed her face. I don't know what came over me. I saw her and just reacted. I never thought about why." She looked down at her hands. "I've never had to think about it before." The honesty of this admission, the first acknowledgement that her actions might have stemmed from unconscious bias rather than procedural concerns, created a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. Dr. Jackson nodded slightly, recognizing this moment of self-reflection, small though it was. That's often how bias works, Miss Reynolds. It operates below our conscious awareness until something forces us to confront it. Agent Rivera, who had been quietly processing Zoe's emergency passport during this exchange, approached the table. Zoe's temporary passport is ready, he announced, handing the new document to Dr. Jackson for inspection. Dr. Jackson examined it carefully before passing it to his daughter. This is now your official travel document. Zoe, it carries the full authority of the United States government. No one has the right to damage or confiscate it without due process. Zoe accepted the passport, holding it with a new awareness of its significance, not just as a travel document, but as a symbol of her citizenship, her rights, and the systems meant to protect them. Thank you, she said to Agent Rivera, her voice steady. Heather watched this exchange, the reality of her situation apparently crystallizing as she observed the systematic response her actions had triggered. Federal agencies mobilized, airport administration engaged, airline management investigating, all because of what she had likely viewed as a minor exercise of power over someone she deemed unworthy of respect. Director Hayes turned his attention back to Heather. Ms. Reynolds, based on the evidence we've reviewed in your own statements, we're placing you on immediate administrative leave pending termination proceedings. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings, and you'll need to surrender your airport credentials before leaving the premises. It wasn't a question or a negotiation. It was a statement of fact delivered with the finality of a judgment already rendered. As Heather was escorted from the room, Dr. Jackson turned to his family. The immediate situation has been addressed. Now we need to focus on making our flight and continuing our trip. Zoe, how are you feeling? Zoe considered the question, looking down at her new passport and then back at her father. Better, she said simply. Like things can actually be fixed when they go wrong. It was perhaps the most important lesson she could have learned from this difficult morning, that systems could work, that justice could be pursued, that her dignity mattered enough for all of this machinery to activate on her behalf. Dr. Jackson smiled at his daughter, pride evident in his expression. That's exactly right. Things can be fixed, and sometimes they can even be improved. Now, let's go catch our flight. Grandma Eleanor is waiting. As the Jackson family prepared to return to Gate D24, Director Hayes approached Dr. Jackson with a concerned expression. Marcus, before you head to your gate, there's something you should know. The video from Gate D24 has gone viral. It's been shared by several major news outlets, and hashtag Torn Passport is trending nationally. He handed Dr. Jackson a tablet displaying a news website. The headline read, "Mummy, caught on camera airline agent tears child's passport. Unaware father is FAA chief." Below was Miguel Ramirez's video, which had now been viewed over 200,000 times. Dr. Jackson studied the screen for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he glanced at Zoe, who was showing her new emergency passport to Eli. "This changes nothing about our immediate plans," he said quietly to Hayes. "My family is still going to New Orleans today, but it does make the systemic response even more important. This isn't just about one gate agent anymore. It's about public trust in the entire air travel system." Hayes nodded gravely. "I agree. That's why I'd like to propose something. With your permission, I'd like to establish a task force to review our entire passenger documentation handling process, with a specific focus on eliminating bias in customer interactions. Would you be willing to serve as an advisory member?" Before Dr. Jackson could respond, Olivia Gardner approached with her tablet. "Dr. Jackson, we've completed a preliminary review of Mrs. Reynolds' passenger interaction history. In the past 6 months alone, she's had 37 documented document verification incidents. Of those, 29 involve passengers of color and 8 involve white passengers. Statistically, given our passenger demographics, that represents a 400% higher scrutiny rate for non-white travelers." Jackson's jaw tightened slightly, the only visible indication of his reaction to these troubling statistics. "This confirms what we suspected. The issue is systemic, not isolated." Regina Alvarez, who had been on a phone call in the corner of the room, rejoined the group. "I've just spoken with our chief operating officer. The airline is prepared to implement immediate changes to our document verification protocols, including mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff and a complete review of our complaint tracking systems. Those are good first steps, Dr. Zoe Jackson acknowledged. But I'd like to see something more concrete, specifically a transparent reporting system that tracks document verification incidents by demographic factors. With quarterly public disclosure of the data, true accountability requires measurement. Alvarez hesitated. That would require significant policy changes at the corporate level. Consider the alternative, Vanessa interjected smoothly, her attorney's instincts engaged. A public relations crisis that's already unfolding, potential civil rights litigation, impossible federal regulatory action. Transparency isn't just the right ethical choice. It's the prudent business decision. The airline representative nodded slowly, recognizing the logic in this assessment. I'll convey that recommendation to leadership in the strongest possible terms. Jackson checked his watch. Our flight boards in 45 minutes. I suggest we continue this conversation after we return from New Orleans. In the meantime, Director Hayes, I accept your invitation to serve in an advisory capacity on your task force. Hayes looked relieved. Thank you, Marcus. We'll formalize the details when you return. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Agent Rivera approached with one final piece of information. Dr. Jackson, for your records, the incident has been formally documented with the State Department under reference number SD-27843-JP. The destruction of a federal passport has been reported to the appropriate authorities, and Ms. Reynolds may face additional consequences beyond her employment termination. Thank you, Agent Rivera, Dr. Jackson replied. And thank you for expediting Zoe's replacement passport. You've turned what could have been a travel nightmare into a manageable inconvenience. Just doing my job, sir, Rivera responded with a slight smile. Safe travels to you and your family. As the Jackson family made their way back toward Gate D24, now escorted by Director Hayes and Olivia Gardner, Zoe walked beside her father, her new passport secured in her backpack's front pocket. Dad, she said quietly, that video of what happened. Is everyone going to see it? Dr. Jackson considered his daughter's question carefully. A lot of people will see it. Yes, that's the nature of social media. Does that bother you? Zoe thought for a moment. Kind of. I don't like that people will see me being treated that way. But also, maybe it's good that they see what happened. Maybe it will help change things. That's very insightful, Zoe, her father replied, impressed by her maturity. Sometimes, difficult experiences can lead to important changes. What happened to you today was wrong, but the response, the accountability, that's what matters. That's the part I want you to remember. As they approached Gate D24, they could see that the atmosphere had changed dramatically. The original gate agent, Heather Reynolds, was gone. In her place stood a different airline employee, an older African-American woman whose name tag read Patricia Thomas, senior gate agent. The waiting area was still filled with passengers, but now there was a palpable buzz of conversation, with many people glancing at their phones and then at the Jackson family as they approached. Director Hayes stepped forward. Ms. Thomas, this is the Jackson family. They'll be boarding Flight 372 to New Orleans. Please ensure they have a smooth experience. Patricia nodded respectfully. Of course, Director Hayes. Then Mom, looking directly at Zoe, she added warmly, Young lady, I want to personally apologize for your experience earlier today. That's not who we are as an airline, and it's certainly not how we treat our valued passengers. Your boarding passes are already processed, and we'll be beginning pre-boarding in about 20 minutes. The contrast between this interaction and Zoe's earlier experience couldn't have been more stark. Night and day, like the difference between Epps' plantation and Solomon Northup's freedom in 12 Years a Slave. Where Heather had been dismissive and hostile, Patricia was warm and respectful. Where there had been suspicion and aggression, there was now acknowledgement and accountability. As they settled into the waiting area, Dr. Jackson noticed several passengers looking at them with expressions of recognition. The story was spreading, both through social media and through the airport's own grapevine. What had begun as a private humiliation for Zoe had become a public example of consequence and correction. Dad, Eli whispered, tugging at his father's sleeve. Everyone's looking at us. Are we famous now? Dr. Jackson smiled slightly. Not famous, buddy, but what happened today matters to people. It's a reminder that how we treat each other matters, and that there can be consequences when someone abuses their authority. Vanessa, who had been checking her phone, looked up with a mixture of concern and determination. Marcus, the story is gaining traction rapidly. 3 major news networks have picked it up, and there are already calls for broader investigations into discrimination at airports. We should think about how we want to handle media inquiries when we return. Dr. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. We'll address that when the time comes. For now, let's focus on our family trip. Zoe has been through enough today without adding media pressure. He looked at his daughter, who was handling the attention with remarkable composure for an 11-year-old. In the midst of this unexpectedly public moment, Dr. Jackson felt a profound sense of pride, not just in the professional response he had coordinated, but in Zoe's resilience and wisdom throughout the ordeal. What had begun as a simple family trip had become something much more significant, a moment of reckoning, a catalyst for change, and perhaps most importantly, a lesson for Zoe about justice, accountability, and the power of standing up for what's right. The pre-boarding announcement for Flight 372 to New Orleans came over the PA system at Gate D24. Patricia Thomas's voice warm and professional as she invited first-class passengers and those needing special assistance to approach the boarding area. That's us, Dr. Jackson said, gathering the family's carry-on items. Let's get settled on board. As they approached the gate, Patricia smiled genuinely at Zoe. May I see your boarding pass and passport, young lady? Zoe reached into her backpack with practiced confidence, producing her new emergency passport and boarding pass. The contrast to her earlier experience was striking. Instead of suspicion and hostility, she was met with respect and professionalism. Patricia examined the documents carefully but efficiently. Everything looks perfect. You're all set for seats 7A through D. Have a wonderful flight to New Orleans. Thank you, Zoe replied, her voice stronger now than it had been hours earlier. The Jackson family made their way down the jetway, Director Hayes and Olivia Gardner watching from the gate area to ensure their boarding proceeded without incident. As they entered the aircraft, the lead flight attendant greeted them with particular attention. Dr. Jackson, Mrs. Jackson, welcome aboard, she said, her name tag identifying her as Maria Gonzalez. We've been briefed about the situation at the gate. On behalf of the entire flight crew, I want to apologize for that experience and assure you that we're committed to making the rest of your journey as comfortable as possible. Mrs. Jackson nodded appreciatively. Thank you, Miss Gonzalez. We're looking forward to an uneventful flight. As the family settled into their first-class seats from our bus, Zoe and Eli by the windows, their parents in the aisle seats beside them, the captain's voice came over the intercom system. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Robert Anderson speaking. Before we begin our boarding process, I'd like to take a moment to welcome the Jackson family aboard. On behalf of our entire airline, I want to express our sincere apologies for the unacceptable experience you had at our gate this morning. We are committed to addressing this situation at the highest levels of our organization and ensuring that all passengers are treated with dignity and respect. Zoe glanced at her father, surprised by this public acknowledgement. Dr. Jackson gave her a reassuring smile. Accountability in action, he said quietly. As the remaining passengers boarded, many glanced curiously at the Jackson family, recognition dawning on some faces as they connected them to the viral video they might have seen on their phones while waiting at the gate. A few nodded respectfully to Dr. Jackson or smiled supportively at Zoe, but most respectfully maintained the family's privacy. Once the boarding was complete and the aircraft doors secured, the pre-flight safety demonstration began. Eli watched with fascination, despite being a frequent flyer. He never tired of the routine. While Zoe gazed out the window at the airport operations, her mind processing the whirlwind of the morning's events. You doing okay? Vanessa asked softly, reaching across the aisle to touch her daughter's hand. Zoe nodded. I'm good, Mom. Just thinking. About what happened. About everything after it happened. Zoe clarified. How Dad knew exactly what to do. How all those people came to help. How the airport director and everyone took it so seriously. Vanessa smiled gently. That's how things are supposed to work. Sweetheart, when something wrong happens, there should be systems in place to address it. That doesn't mean justice always comes easily or automatically. Sometimes people have to fight for it. But today, you saw how accountability can work when the right processes are followed. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Dr. Jackson's phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah Morales, his deputy director at the FAA. Marcus, investigation formally initiated. Incident report JFK 17623 filed. Press inquiries coming in. How do you want to handle? He typed a quick response. Stick to facts. Federal document destruction. Appropriate measures taken. No speculation about motivations. We'll address more thoroughly after family trip. As he switched his phone to airplane mode, another text came through from Director Hayes. Security footage secured. HR reviewing. Ms. Reynolds, complete employment history. Task force forming. Call when you land. Dr. Jackson put his phone away with the satisfied expression of someone who had set proper systems in motion. The aircraft taxied toward the runway, joining the queue of planes waiting for takeoff. Inside the terminal, events continued to unfold in response to the morning's incident. In a different conference room, Heather Reynolds sat across from Regina Alvarez and the airline's HR director, James Wilson. The torn passport had been secured as evidence, but photographs of it were displayed on a screen on the wall, the damage unmistakable, the deliberate nature of the tear evident even in still images. Ms. Reynolds, Wilson began, his tone formal, we're conducting this interview as part of our internal investigation into the incident at Gate D24 this morning. This conversation is being recorded, and you have the right to have a union representative present if you wish. Heather shook her head slightly. I'll proceed without representation. Very well, Wilson continued. Let's start with your account of what happened when Zoe Jackson approached your counter. Heather shifted uncomfortably in her chair. A young girl approached without adult supervision. I was concerned about an unaccompanied minor attempting to board without proper documentation. Alvarez tapped her tablet, bringing up the security footage. The video shows that you examined her boarding pass first. Did you note that she was traveling in first class? I may have noticed that. Yes. And what was your reaction to that information? Heather hesitated. I found it unusual for a child her age to be traveling first class without parents present. Wilson made a note. Ms. Reynolds, our records show that approximately 847 children between the ages of 10 and 13 traveled through this airport in first class last month alone. Many of them approached gates independently, while their parents completed other pre-flight tasks. Would you describe all of those situations as unusual? No, but what specifically is about Zoe Jackson's situation struck you as suspicious? The direct question hung in the air. Heather struggled to formulate an answer that wouldn't incriminate her further. The passport, it didn't feel right. In what specific way, Alvarez pressed? You've processed thousands of passports during your employment. What specific security feature appeared compromised on Zoe's passport? I can't pinpoint exactly. Because according to Agent Rivera from the State Department, who examined the torn document, there were no irregularities whatsoever. The passport was completely valid with all security features intact. Wilson leaned forward. Ms. Reynolds, let's address what the evidence clearly shows. You took one look at a young black girl with a first-class ticket, made immediate assumptions about whether she belonged in that cabin, and then proceeded to create a justification for denying her boarding by destroying her federal documentation. Heather's face flushed. That's not what happened. I was following protocol. Which protocol specifically authorizes the destruction of a passenger's passport? Alvarez interrupted. Please cite the section of our operations manual that instructs gate agents to tear federal documents. When Heather remained silent, Wilson continued. We've reviewed your employment history, including the 17 formal complaints filed against you in the past year. 14 of those complaints came from passengers of color, alleging unnecessarily aggressive document scrutiny, rude treatment, or boarding complications. Did you ever consider that your actions might demonstrate a pattern of bias? Those were all different situations, Heather protested weakly. Yet the statistical pattern is clear. Wilson replied, your interactions with non-white passengers have generated complaints at a rate 400% higher than would be expected based on our passenger demographics. He turned to a new screen showing Heather's performance metrics. Moreover, your document verification rejections show a similar pattern, 73% involving passengers of color versus 27% involving white passengers, despite our passenger population being approximately 57% white. Heather stared at the numbers, her defensiveness crumbling slightly under the weight of statistical evidence. I didn't realize, I never thought of myself as biased, Alvarez finished for her. Few people do, but our actions speak louder than our self-perception. For the first time since the incident began, something shifted in Heather's expression, a crack in her defensive armor, a flicker of genuine self-reflection. She looked down at her hands folded tightly in her lap. No one's ever shown me these numbers before, she said quietly. I just did my job the way I thought it should be done. Wilson's tone softened slightly, though remained professional. That's often how unconscious bias works, Miss Reynolds. It operates below our awareness, influencing our decisions in ways we don't recognize until someone holds up a mirror. So what happens now? Heather asked, her voice smaller than before. Wilson tapped his tablet again. Let's return to this morning's incident. The video clearly shows you tearing Zoe's passport. What was going through your mind at that moment? Heather took a deep breath. Honestly, I saw this kid, this young black girl in nice clothes with a first-class ticket, and something in me just reacted. I thought, this doesn't look right. And once I decided that, everything she did just confirmed what I already believed. She paused. I've never had to think about why I felt that way. I just did. She didn't look like she belonged there, Alvarez repeated slowly. That's perhaps the most honest statement you've made today, Ms. Reynolds. Wilson closed his tablet. Based on the evidence we've reviewed and your own statements, we are terminating your employment effective immediately. This termination is for cause, specifically for the destruction of a federal document, violation of company policy regarding document handling, and demonstrable pattern of discriminatory treatment of passengers. He slid a document across the table. This details your severance limitations and the process for returning company property. You will be escorted from the premises today, and your security credentials will be deactivated. Heather stared at the document, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. Is there any possibility of a second chance sensitivity training? Perhaps. The airline does offer an appeals process, Alvarez acknowledged. However, given the severity of this incident, the clear video evidence, and the federal nature of the violation, I would characterize your chances of reinstatement as extremely unlikely. Heather nodded slowly, a complex mix of emotions crossing her face. Resignation, regret, and perhaps the first genuine understanding of the consequences of her actions. There is one thing, Alvarez added, studying Heather carefully. The airport is developing a new training program on bias recognition and mitigation. Your experience, both the incident and these performance metrics, could provide valuable insight. If you're interested in contributing to that effort, I could pass your information to the program coordinator. It wouldn't change your employment status, but it might be a constructive way to process what's happened. Heather looked up, surprised by the offer. I think I'd like that. At least something good might come from this mess. Wilson gathered his materials. Someone will contact you about that possibility. For now, security will escort you to collect your belongings. As Heather was escorted from the room, she caught a glimpse of a television in the airport staff break room, where her actions were already playing on a news channel, the headline "Gate Agent Tears Child's Passport" scrolling across the bottom of the screen. The public nature of her mistake was just beginning to unfold, her private biases now exposed on a national stage. Meanwhile, the Jackson family's flight was taking off, climbing into the clear October sky. Zoe watched through her window as the airport grew smaller below them, the buildings and runways diminishing until they resembled a child's playset. Dad, she said, turning to her father, what's going to happen to Heather? Jackson considered his daughter's question carefully. She's lost her job, which is an appropriate consequence for her actions. There may be additional legal repercussions for destroying a federal document, though that will be determined by other authorities. Will she go to jail? Zoe asked, her expression troubled. That's unlikely for a first offense, Dr. Jackson explained. But there will be consequences beyond just losing her position. I'm not sure how I feel about that, Zoe admitted. I'm angry about what she did, but I also don't want to ruin someone's whole life. Dr. Jackson felt a surge of pride at his daughter's compassion. Even after being mistreated, Her concern extended to the well-being of the person who had wronged her. That shows remarkable maturity. Zoe, he said, justice isn't about punishment for punishment's sake. It's about accountability, appropriate consequences, and creating systems that prevent similar incidents in the future. What happened today isn't just about Heather Reynolds. It's about ensuring that other passengers don't face the same treatment. Vanessa leaned across the aisle. Sweetheart, sometimes the most powerful response to discrimination isn't vengeance, but reform. Because of what happened to you, there will likely be new training programs, better oversight of customer interactions, and improved complaint tracking. Your experience, difficult as it was, may help protect countless other travelers. Zoe nodded slowly, processing these insights. So even though it was awful when it happened, maybe something good can come from it. Exactly, her father confirmed. That's how progress often works. Challenging experiences lead to necessary changes. As the aircraft leveled off at cruising altitude, Dr. Jackson gazed out at the horizon, stretching endlessly before them. What had begun as a routine family trip had transformed into something far more significant, a teaching moment for his daughter about justice, accountability, and the ongoing work of building more equitable systems. Despite the difficulty of the morning's events, he couldn't help but feel that Zoe had gained something invaluable, a first-hand understanding of how to stand up for what's right, how to navigate institutions, and how to transform personal adversity into positive change. The flight from Metropolitan International to Louis Armstrong New Orleans International Airport took just under 3 hours. For most of the journey, Zoe alternated between reading her book, playing car games with Eli, and gazing thoughtfully out the window. Though the morning's events still weighed on her mind, the further they flew from the incident, the more she was able to refocus on the excitement of visiting her grandmother. As the aircraft began its descent into New Orleans, the captain's voice came over the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our approach to Louis Armstrong International. Current weather in New Orleans is 78 degrees with partly cloudy skies. On behalf of the entire crew, I'd like to thank you for flying with us today, and we hope your experience with us has been a positive one. The subtle emphasis on positive wasn't lost on the Jackson family. Throughout the flight, the crew had been exceptionally attentive, ensuring their needs were met with professionalism and warmth, a stark contrast to Zoe's experience at Gate D4. Look, Zoe, Eli exclaimed, pointing out the window as the Mississippi River came into view, its winding path cutting through the landscape. I can see Grandma's house from here. No, you can't, Zoe laughed, momentarily distracted from her thoughts. Grandma lives in Gentilly, not right on the river. Well, I can see her neighborhood, then, Eli insisted, unwilling to relinquish his excitement. Dr. Jackson smiled at their exchange. This was why they had decided to continue their trip despite the morning's difficulties, for these moments of family connection, for the fun of visiting Grandma Eleanor, for the opportunity to step away from work responsibilities and simply be present with his children. As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, Dr. Jackson turned on his phone to find a flurry of notifications. Multiple missed calls from Sarah Morales, several text messages from Director Hayes, and numerous news alerts mentioning FAA Chief Inspector and passport incident. The story had clearly gained significant traction during their flight. Updates, Vanessa asked quietly, noting his expression as he scrolled through the messages. The investigation is proceeding, he replied. Director Hayes has formed the task force we discussed. Sarah's handling the media inquiries for now, keeping them factual and procedural, rather than personal. He showed her one of the news alerts. Airport apologizes after gate agent destroys child's passport. Employee terminated. Federal investigation launched. Vanessa nodded approvingly. They're focusing on the institutional response, not exploiting Zoe's experience. That's good. As they deplaned, Dr. Jackson was approached by the captain, who extended his hand. Dr. Jackson, I wanted to personally apologize again for what happened this morning. I've been with this airline for 23 years, and I was deeply troubled to hear about the incident. Thank you, Captain Anderson, Dr. Jackson replied, shaking his hand. The appropriate measures are being taken. We appreciate the professionalism your crew showed today. In the terminal, they collected their checked luggage and made their way toward the arrivals area where Grandma Eleanor would be waiting. Dr. Jackson used this time to return Sarah Morales' call, stepping slightly away from the family for a moment of privacy. Sarah, what's the situation? The story's gone national. Marcus, she reported. Every major news outlet has picked it up. Miguel Ramirez's video has over 1.2 million views now. The airline's stock dropped 3% this afternoon on concerns about potential lawsuits and federal action. Zoe Jackson sighed. Have we issued any official statement yet? Just the basics, confirming that an incident involving federal document destruction occurred, that appropriate investigation protocols have been activated, and that the FAA is working with airport authorities to address both the specific incident and any systemic issues it revealed. Good. Keep it procedural for now. We're about to meet my mother-in-law, and I'd like to give Zoe at least a day of normal family time before we decide how to handle the media aspect. Understood. One more thing you should know. Thomas Rivera submitted his report about the emergency passport issuance. The cost was $1,732, which would normally be charged to the passport holder, but the State Department has waived all fees given the circumstances. That's appropriate, Dr. Zoe Jackson acknowledged. Anything else urgent? Director Hayes called twice. The task force had its preliminary meeting this afternoon. They've already identified 17 procedural gaps in document verification protocols that could allow bias to influence decisions. He'd like your input when you return. Tell him I'll call tomorrow morning. We're trying to maintain some semblance of a family vacation here. After ending the call, Jackson rejoined his family as they approached the arrivals area. There, waiting with barely contained excitement, was Eleanor Jackson, a distinguished woman of 76 whose silver-streaked hair was styled in an elegant updo, her posture straight and proud despite her years. She had been a teacher for over 4 decades, had marched with civil rights leaders in the 1960s, and had raised 3 children who all went on to professional success, including Vanessa. "There's my babies," Eleanor called out, her arms opening wide as Eli broke into a run toward his grandmother. "Grandma," he shouted, launching himself into her embrace. Zoe followed at a more measured pace, though her face lit up with genuine joy as she approached Eleanor for her own hug. "Hi, Grandma." Eleanor held her granddaughter at arm's length, examining her face with the perceptive gaze of someone who had taught children for most of her life. "Something's happened," she said. Not a question, but a statement. "I can see it in your eyes, child." Vanessa exchanged a look with Dr. Jackson as they joined the group. "Mom, let's get home first. We'll explain everything there." Eleanor nodded, knowing when to press and when to wait. "Well, whatever it is, you're here now, and that's what matters. I've got gumbo simmering and peach cobbler cooling on the windowsill. Southern comfort for whatever troubles you've brought with you." As they loaded their luggage into Eleanor's car, a well-maintained Buick that she drove with confident precision despite her age, Zoe found herself relaxing into the familiar rhythm of family interaction. The morning's trauma began to recede, not forgotten but no longer at the forefront of her thoughts. During the drive to Eleanor's home in the Gentilly neighborhood, Eli chattered excitedly about school projects and soccer games, while Eleanor updated them on neighborhood news and family gossip. The normality of it was soothing, a reminder that life continued beyond difficult experiences. When they arrived at Eleanor's house, a charming single-story home with a spacious front porch and vibrant garden, Zoe felt a wave of comfort and wash over her. This place had always represented safety and love, a sanctuary where she was unconditionally accepted and celebrated. As they settled into the living room, Eleanor fixed her gaze on Dr. Jackson. "Now, Marcus, tell me what happened to put that shadow behind my grandbaby's eyes." Dr. Jackson glanced at Zoe, silently asking permission. When she nodded, he began recounting the morning's events: the torn passport, the discriminatory treatment, the institutional response. He kept his explanation straightforward, neither dramatizing nor minimizing what had occurred. Eleanor listened intently, her expression growing increasingly troubled. When Dr. Jackson finished, she turned to Zoe with gentle eyes. "Come here, child," she said, patting the space beside her on the sofa. Zoe moved to sit next to her grandmother, who took her hands in her own weathered ones. "I wish I could tell you this is the last time something like this will happen to you," Eleanor said, her voice soft but strong. "But I'd be lying if I did. What I can tell you is this: you come from a long line of people who faced much worse and still found ways to thrive, to maintain their dignity, to change systems from within. She glanced at the new emergency passport that Zoe had placed on the coffee table. That little book there, it means you're a citizen with rights. Nobody can take that away from you. Even if they tear up the paper it's written on. Your citizenship, your humanity, your worth, those things exist whether others recognize them or not. She squeezed Zoe's hands. I'm proud of how you handled this. Standing your ground, calling your father, being part of making sure this doesn't happen to other children. That's how change happens. One brave stand at a time. Zoe leaned against her grandmother's shoulder, drawing strength from her wisdom and the lineage of resilience she represented. In that moment, surrounded by family who understood both the pain of discrimination and the power of principled response, Zoe felt herself beginning to heal from the morning's hurt. The emergency passport on the table was more than just a replacement document now. It was a tangible reminder that systems could work, that justice could be pursued, that her voice mattered enough to set significant changes in motion. 3 months after the incident at Metropolitan International, Dr. Marcus Jackson stood at a podium in the Department of Transportation's main conferences center in Washington, D.C. Behind him, a large screen displayed the title of his presentation, From Incident to Impact: Transforming Passenger Documentation Procedures Through Data-Driven Accountability. The audience consisted of transportation officials, airline executives, airport administrators, and civil rights advocates, all gathered for the first national symposium on equitable transportation practices. Dr. Jackson had been invited to deliver the keynote address, sharing the outcomes of the comprehensive reforms implemented following what had become known in industry circles as the passport incident. 3 months ago, Dr. Jackson began, his voice carrying the authoritative tone that had earned him respect throughout his career. A gate agent at Metropolitan International Airport deliberately tore a passenger's passport, claiming it was fraudulent when it was, in fact, completely valid. This incident, which happened to involve my daughter, exposed significant vulnerabilities in how travel documentation is verified across our transportation system. He advanced to the next slide, which displayed not statistics, but a photograph of a young traveler, a Latina girl of about 12, confidently presenting her passport to a gate agent while her parents stood nearby. The gate agent was examining the document with appropriate care and respect, maintaining eye contact with the child rather than speaking over her head to the adults. This is what success looks like, Dr. Jackson explained. Dignified, respectful interactions where procedures are followed without bias or assumptions. The reforms we've implemented over the past 3 months have been designed to make this the standard experience for all travelers, not the exception. Only after establishing this human context did he move to the next slide, showing the key reforms that had been implemented. The task force formed in response to this incident identified 37 specific points of potential bias in traditional document verification procedures. Implementation of reform protocols has now been completed at 143 airports nationwide, with real improvements in how passengers are treated. Rather than listing statistical percentages, Jackson shared specific examples of how the changes were working. In Chicago, a new rapid response team intervened when an elderly South Asian traveler was being subjected to excessive document scrutiny. In Miami, a statistical monitoring alert identified a concerning pattern with one particular gate agent, allowing for early intervention and additional training before a serious incident could occur. And in Atlanta, the new Youth Travel Advocacy Program has empowered young travelers to understand their rights and navigate the airport experience with confidence. From the front row, Secretary of Transportation Maria Alvarez nodded approvingly. Her department had championed these reforms, recognizing their potential to transform passenger experiences across the entire transportation network. The most powerful lesson from this initiative, Dr. Jackson concluded, is that meaningful change requires both individual accountability and systemic reform. The gate agent who tore my daughter's passport faced appropriate consequences for her actions. But if we had stopped there, with just one termination, one incident report, one apology, we would have missed the opportunity for transformative improvement. As Dr. Jackson elaborated on each element, he emphasized the systemic nature of the reforms, not just addressing individual behaviors, but transforming the institutional structures that had previously allowed discriminatory practices to persist undetected and unaddressed. I'd like to acknowledge that this journey hasn't been without challenges, while he added, addressing the resistance that had initially emerged from certain corners of the industry. We faced budget constraints, competing priorities, and yes, some resistance to change. Several airlines initially pushed back on the statistical monitoring requirements, arguing they would be too costly to implement. Some supervisors questioned whether racial bias was a significant enough problem to warrant such comprehensive reforms. He paused meaningfully. But data tells the truth, even when people don't want to hear it. When we began monitoring document verification interactions by demographic factors, the patterns became impossible to ignore. And when we shared those patterns transparently, even the most resistant stakeholders recognized the need for change. The applause that followed was sustained and genuine. Recognition from industry leaders that the work Dr. Jackson described represented a significant advancement in transportation equity. As he stepped away from the podium, Secretary Alvarez took his place to announce the nationwide expansion of these protocols to all federally regulated transportation hubs, including train stations, bus terminals, and cruise ports. Meanwhile, at her middle school in Silver Springs, Zoe Jackson was giving a presentation of her own, a civic engagement project for her 6th grade social studies class. Her topic, How Systems Change Making a Difference in Your Community. 3 months ago, Zoe began, echoing her father's words without realizing it. Something happened to me that wasn't fair. A gate agent at the airport tore up my passport because she didn't think I belonged in first class. Her classmates listened with rapt attention. Many had heard bits and pieces of this story, but never the full account from Zoe herself. What happened next taught me something really important about how change happens, she continued. My dad used his knowledge to make sure there were consequences. The airport created new rules to make sure it wouldn't happen to other kids. The airline changed how they train their employees. And now those changes are happening at airports all over the country. Zoe advanced to her next slide, which showed a copy of the Young Traveler's Rights Guide that her experience had inspired. This booklet helps kids know what to do if someone treats them unfairly at the airport, she explained in age-appropriate language. It teaches you who to talk to if you have a problem and what your rights are when you travel. As she concluded her presentation, Zoe shared what she had personally learned. The most important thing I figured out is that one person really can make a difference, even a kid like me. But you have to speak up when something's wrong. You have to tell someone who can help. And you have to make sure that fixing your problem helps other people too, not just you. Her teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, watched with undisguised pride as Zoe navigated this presentation with poise and confidence. What had clearly been a traumatic experience for her student had somehow been transformed into a powerful learning opportunity, not just about civic systems, but about resilience, advocacy, and the power of speaking up when faced with injustice. Later that afternoon, as Zoe packed up her project materials, Ms. Rodriguez approached her desk. That was an excellent presentation. Zoe, you took a difficult personal experience and found the broader lessons in it. That's not easy to do, especially for someone your age. Zoe smiled, appreciating the recognition. My grandma Eleanor says that every hard thing can teach you something. If you're willing to learn, the survival wisdom that Paul D. carried in Beloved, turning trauma into testimony. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman, Ms. Rodriguez replied. Have you considered joining our school's Student Advocacy Council next year? We need voices like yours, students who understand how systems work and how to change them when necessary. Zoe's eyes brightened at the invitation. I'd like that. Maybe I could tell other kids what to do if something unfair happens to them. That's exactly what the council needs, Ms. Rodriguez confirmed. As Zoe headed home that afternoon, she felt a sense of completion that had been gradually building over the months since the incident. What had begun as a moment of humiliation and injustice had evolved into something much more significant, a catalyst for meaningful change and a profound learning experience about how individuals could influence systems. 1 year to the day after Heather Reynolds tore Zoe's passport at gate D24, the Jackson family once again found themselves at Metropolitan International Airport. This time, however, they weren't traveling. They had been invited to attend the official launch of the airport's new Passenger Equity Center, a permanent facility dedicated to ensuring fair and dignified treatment for all travelers. The center, located in the main terminal, featured interactive displays explaining passenger rights, multilingual staff trained to address concerns, and a monitoring system that provided real-time data on service equity across the airport. A wall of screens displayed statistical dashboards tracking everything from document verification times to complaint resolutions, all broken down by demographic factors to ensure transparency and accountability. Director William Hayes, who had guided the airport's transformation over the past year, greeted the Jackson family warmly as they arrived for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Dr. Jackson, Mrs. Jackson, Zoe, Eli, thank you for joining us today, he said, shaking each of their hands in turn. This center represents the culmination of the work that began with your experience. Zoe, what happened to you a year ago was unacceptable, but the changes it inspired have fundamentally transformed how we approach passenger dignity and equity. Zoe, now 12 years old and noticeably more confident than she had been a year earlier, nodded in acknowledgement. It looks really impressive. Director Hayes, will kids be able to use it too? Or is it just for adults? That's an excellent question, Hayes replied, appreciating her focus on inclusion. We've designed it specifically to be accessible to travelers of all ages. In fact, we have a dedicated youth advocacy section with age-appropriate resources, including an updated version of the Young Traveler's Rights Guide that you helped inspire. As they toured the facility, Dr. Jackson noted the comprehensive nature of the changes implemented over the past year. What had begun as a response to a single incident of discrimination had evolved into a systematic reimagining of how airports approach passenger equity, with Metropolitan International serving as a model for facilities across the country. Near the entrance to the center stood a surprising figure, Heather Reynolds. She was engaged in conversation with a diverse group of newly hired gate agents, sharing what appeared to be a deeply personal story. As the Jackson family approached, she glanced up, her expression registering recognition and clear discomfort. Director Hayes noticed the moment and explained quietly to Dr. Jackson. After her termination, Ms. Reynolds contacted us about the bias awareness program Regina mentioned to her. She completed the course and then volunteered to speak about her experience, what happened that day, the patterns in her customer interactions she never recognized, and the consequences of unchecked bias. Her testimony has been powerful for our training programs. Dr. Jackson nodded thoughtfully. Accountability can sometimes lead to growth. As the group drew closer, Heather straightened and addressed the Jackson family directly. Dr. Jackson, Mrs. Jackson, she began, her voice steady but humble. I didn't know you'd be here today. I want to apologize to your daughter for what I did last year. There's no excuse for how I treated her. She turned to Zoe. I'm sorry, Zoe. What I did was wrong, not just tearing your passport, but making assumptions about you based on how you looked. I've spent this past year learning about bias and trying to understand why I did what I did. I can't undo what happened, but I'm working to make sure other airline employees don't make the same mistakes. The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a scripted corporate apology, but a genuine expression of remorse and responsibility. Zoe studied Heather's face for a moment before responding. Thank you for saying sorry. What you did really hurt my feelings, but I'm glad something good came from it. It was a child's response, direct, honest, and without the polished forgiveness adults often feel compelled to offer. Yet in its simplicity, it acknowledged both the harm done and the possibility of moving forward. The encounter was brief but significant, a moment of human connection that transcended the roles of victim and perpetrator, illustrating that accountability could lead not just to consequences, but to meaningful change. As they moved away, Zoe whispered to her father, "Did you know she was going to be here?" Jackson shook his head. No, but I'm not surprised she's found a way to learn from what happened. At noon, the official ribbon-cutting ceremony began. A crowd had gathered, airport staff, airline representatives, transportation officials, and members of the media. Director Hayes approached the podium, flanked by Dr. Jackson and Secretary of Transportation Maria Alvarez. 1 year ago today, Hayes began, an incident occurred at this airport that revealed significant flaws in our approach to passenger dignity and documentation verification. Rather than minimizing that incident or treating it as an isolated case, we chose to use it as a catalyst for systematic reform. He gestured toward the gleaming new facility behind him. The Passenger Equity Center represents our institutional commitment to ensuring that all travelers, regardless of age, race, appearance, or background, receive respectful, consistent, and dignified treatment throughout their airport experience. Secretary Alvarez spoke next, announcing that the model developed at Metropolitan International was being implemented at airports nationwide, with federal funding allocated for similar passenger advocacy centers at all major transportation hubs. What began as one airport's response to a troubling incident has evolved into a national movement for transportation equity, she explained. The systems developed here are now being adopted across the country, creating a new standard for how we approach passenger dignity. Finally, Dr. Jackson was invited to address the gathering. He spoke briefly about the importance of institutional responsiveness, how organizations demonstrated their values not just in their policies, but in how they handled failures and misconduct when they occurred. What impressed me most about Metropolitan International's response, he concluded, was the willingness to move beyond individual accountability to systematic reform. The gate agent who tore my daughter's passport faced appropriate consequences for her actions. But the airport and its leadership recognized that truly addressing the underlying issues required examining and transforming the systems that had allowed such an incident to occur. As the ceremony concluded with the cutting of a ceremonial ribbon, Zoe stood slightly apart from the crowd, observing the proceedings with thoughtful eyes. She had grown significantly over the past year, not just physically, but in her understanding of justice, systems, and the complex work of creating meaningful change. When a reporter approached and asked how she felt about all the changes her experience had inspired, Zoe answered simply, "It feels good knowing other kids won't have to go through what I did. That's what matters most to me." As they walked through to the terminal toward the exit, Zoe noticed something that brought a smile to her face. A young black girl, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, confidently presenting her passport to a gate agent who examined it with appropriate care and respect, maintaining eye contact and speaking to the child directly rather than over her head to the waiting parents. It was a small moment, an ordinary interaction that would have gone unnoticed a year ago. But for Zoe, it represented everything that had changed. A system transformed to better serve all its users, including those who had previously been most vulnerable to dismissal or mistreatment. "Dad," she said quietly, pointing out the interaction to her father. "That's what it was all for. Right, Dr. Jackson followed her gaze, immediately understanding what his daughter had observed. "Yes, Zoe, that's exactly what it was all for. Dignity for everyone, not just those who know how to demand it." As the Jackson family left Metropolitan International Airport that day, they carried with them not just the framed photograph and portfolio of documentation, but something far more valuable, the knowledge that systems could be changed, that justice could be pursued, that one voice, even a young one, could spark transformations that benefited countless others. For Zoe, the journey from victim to catalyst to advocate had been both challenging and empowering. She had experienced discrimination firsthand, witnessed the mechanisms of accountability in action, and participated in the creation of reforms that would protect other travelers from similar treatment. The experience had shaped her understanding of citizenship, justice, and her own potential to affect change. Walking to their car, Zoe held the framed photograph close to her chest. "I think I want to put this in my room," she told her parents. "Not to remind me of the bad part, but to remember that speaking up matters." Dr. Jackson smiled at his daughter with profound pride. In handling this difficult situation with such maturity and insight, Zoe had demonstrated qualities that would serve her well throughout her life: resilience in the face of unfairness, courage to stand up for what's right, and the wisdom to focus on systemic improvements rather than mere personal vindication. What had begun with a torn passport had culminated in a transformed transportation system, one that now actively monitored for bias, trained staff to recognize and prevent discrimination, and created accountability mechanisms to ensure dignified treatment for all passengers. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome wasn't quantifiable. It was the knowledge that the next child who approached a gate alone would be treated with the respect and dignity they deserved. Not because of who their parents were, but because the system itself had been redesigned to ensure it. As Dr. Jackson drove his family home, he reflected on the lesson at the heart of this experience, that justice wasn't just about addressing individual wrongs, but about building systems that prevented those wrongs from occurring in the first place. It was a lesson he had spent his career trying to implement. And now, through this unexpected journey, It was a lesson his daughter had learned as well. If you've been moved by Zoe's story, there are concrete steps you can take when you witness or experience discrimination. Document everything, record video if possible, write down names and times, and save any related paperwork. Report incidents immediately to supervisors, customer service, or appropriate authorities. Know your rights. Visit USAID.gov/passenger complaints to learn about federal protections for travelers. Support organizations fighting for transportation equity, like the National Action Network's Transportation Equity Project. Has this story resonated with you? Have you witnessed discrimination and spoken up? Or have you seen systems change in positive ways? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might inspire others to find their voice when facing unfairness. Remember, the smallest voices can create the biggest changes. Sometimes the most powerful response to injustice isn't just demanding accountability for yourself, but ensuring that systems are improved for everyone who comes after you. If this video helped you understand how to fight discrimination or inspired you to speak up when you see something wrong, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these stories of triumph in the face of injustice. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, remember that change begins with those brave enough to speak up and continues with those committed enough to transform systems. Together, we can build a world where dignity isn't a privilege for some, but a right for everyone.